live show. To participate live in our chat room, and don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we have an exciting show. John Burroughs is coming up, and he's going to be talking about what's been going on the last few years since he was on the show last, and anything. I don't know if there's anything new in Rendlesham Forest, but we're definitely going to be talking about Rendlesham Forest, that's for sure. Our shows, as you probably know, are now live streaming on YouTube, and one of the changes that we are making is we always send out our newsletter, and that newsletter goes out the day after our show. Now we're going to be sending out the newsletter the day of our show with the upcoming guest. That way you get an opportunity to watch the show live if you would like. So you can sign up on that mailing list, which is right on podcastufo.com, right on the sidebar. And you will get one letter per week. I'm not going to flood you with newsletters or anything like that. So the Everything Else show is added to the supporters RSS feed for shows, and that is on YouTube as well. Next week we have Leslie Kane coming up talking about near-death experiences and possible life after death and all that, a book she has recently written. So she'll be on Monday. If anyone wants to watch that live, it will be coming up in the supporter feed as well. And thank you very much, supporters, for supporting the show. Anyone can help out at $2 or more per month. All that information is on podcastufo.com. This show does cost several $100s a month to run, so it is very much appreciated when people help us out here. And that will do it for me, Alejandro. What's going on?
Oh, this and that.
This and that and the other? We're interested in the other.
The other. Oh, yeah. The other. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oh, I was prepared for this and that. Uh-oh.
Okay. Well,
awkward.
Shuffle through your notes.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, there's some good stuff this week.
Great.
There really is.
I know there is.
Great even. Great stuff.
All right. So
you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So, yeah, this is a cool one from, have you heard of John Greenwald?
Never. Yes, of course I have. And
you have? Good.
I got to meet him last year, yes.
Oh, you did? That's wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah, great kid. He's not so much a kid anymore. I think he might even be in his 30s, and he's a father now. But he was a kid when he started doing all of this. And what was it that he did? He would do Freedom of Information Act requests to get all kinds of information out. Now he has over 1 million pages of declassified information on his website, and his latest additions are some files from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And essentially what this is, they're called the NRC, and they, monitor the safety of nuclear reactors and stuff like that. And that's what they do. So he asked them for their UFO files. And it wasn't that long ago. And surprisingly, he said quicker than normal, he actually got a response, and he got 43 pages of documents.
Isn't that amazing? Wow.
Yeah, pretty cool. So pretty quickly. Now, there wasn't a whole lot there. It sounds like a lot, 43 pages. But most of these pages had to deal with one particular case. And the last two seemed to deal with two separate ones, or just two inquiries they had received. So not as interesting. However, the case that is mostly featured in these files is extraordinary, and my humble opinion, I think it's really good. So what this case entails is a report that they received in 2010 from a former security officer. This security officer worked at Cooper Nuclear Station, and essentially it's a power plant, and in Nebraska. He submitted this report in 2010, although he remembered the account from the late 80s. He just had felt that he didn't believe it had gotten properly reported. So for some reason, in 2010, he's thinking, hey, you know what? I better make sure that I report that and make sure it got properly reported. So that's essentially what he sent in. He was like, this should have been reported. But his sighting is pretty cool. So while he was at the intake structure one night, now this power plant is right off of the Missouri River. And it's actually almost practically in the river, which has caused controversy in the past about flooding and stuff like this, because it juts out into this river. And I mean, I would be concerned about contamination and things like this, but they probably use the water for cooling. But anyways, at the intake, which is where, I'm sure it's taking in water, one night when he observed an unidentified flying object fly down the Missouri River. It was about 150 feet in the air. It hovered in front of the intake. He saw it for a few minutes. Then he called another security guard who also saw it. And then together they saw it turn and go back up the river. And that was it. So pretty shocking that this had happened, that flowing this closely. But it happened again. You're supposed to make some sort of expression of, whoa.
I can't tell. Actually, if you want me to be frank with you, I was thinking we had Skype issues, the hesitation thing, because it's been happening a little bit.
Oh, no. That was a
dramatic pause?
Effect. Yeah, It was a dramatic pause.
Okay. Can we do that? Let's just do that over again. Okay. It went up the river.
Yeah, so it went up the river and disappeared.
What?
And then, but this is what's really cool. So, is that the next evening it happened again. Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, this time at first when it happened, he didn't call anybody. The UFO came up the river again, but this time it went into a protected area and it hovered above one of the reactor buildings. He said he could see it was triangular in shape. He believed that the object was roughly a third the size of the reactor building, which of course, those are very large buildings.
They are.
Since it was in the protected area, he called the security break room, which is, I guess, where all the security guards were. He was the only one working at the time. They came out, and they saw the object as well. It hovered for a few minutes, and then it exited the protected area and returned back up to the river, to the north, just like it had the previous night. And that was it. He never saw it again, but pretty crazy. So, of course, that's a big deal when some unknown object, comes in, hovers, and then flies off, over a nuclear power plant. So he thought, this is a big deal. It needs to be reported. Now, in these papers, the NRC actually did some investigation. In particular, a gentleman by the name of Nick Taylor, who is a senior resident inspector. When he sent off information in one of these letters, he said he couldn't find any records that corroborated this account. However, he said that doesn't mean that it didn't happen. He said reporting these days is much better than it used to be. He gave an example that he looked for some reports between January 1, 1986 and December 31st, 1989. The witness said that he believed it happened sometime in that period. The investigator said there were only 1,000 reports total overall. However, he says these days we report much more thoroughly, and there's about 10,000 reports a year. So he wasn't surprised he couldn't find anything because just people didn't fill out reports back then for some reason. Mm-hmm. But he did say that regarding the investigation of this case, it's going to be one wild ride, is what he put. Oh. So we don't know much beyond that. He said he did talk to. So the other witnesses, the other security guards that were hanging out in the break room are hanging out in that break room to this day. So I guess, at least in 2010, when this was investigated and reported, those guys still work there. All of the original witnesses, just this one guy who reported it is the only one who was retired. So they spoke with the other witnesses, but unfortunately, we don't have any information as to what they had said. that was apparently forwarded to an ARB, which is a review board, and so they have that information. But pretty incredible report, I think, huh?
I do too. I always am fascinated by anything to do with nuclear weapons and nuclear power, anything to do with UFOs, because there's definitely some type of connection there. And I wonder if Robert Hastings will be interested in trying to investigate any part of this one.
Yeah, we'll have to see. It certainly fits in his wheelhouse. And he's done some, the best work in this area. So
right.
It's a great case. He ought to look into it. That's for sure.
I'm sure he probably knows about it. I'm sure probably John Greenwald would have contacted him, I would think. Maybe I'm just full of assumptions. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're making a lot of assumptions.
I think I am, too. Well,
however, he may be aware. But that makes me think I should forward him this story.
Why don't you go ahead and forward him the story?
Okay, great idea.
Yeah.
That is a great idea. I'll do that.
Glad I thought
so the other thing, this is kind of funny too, because the other files in these papers were essentially one person claiming that she believed that these aircraft that were nuclear powered had crashed and created essentially nuclear hotspots,
right.
Which they said no. And then another report, and here's how they summarized it. The individual expressed vague concerns about finding low-level radiation within the last year where his daughter, whom he believes is an alien or alien transplant, passed. So that's sad.
Wow.
She passed away. In addition, the paper goes on, in addition, the individual believes that travel speed can be increased using the relativity equation with minor modifications. Finally, the individual has observed UFOs. They responded to this gentleman and essentially said, those topics don't really fit into our purview of duties, and suggested that perhaps he contact the Department of Defense.
So are you saying these last stories, someone actually contacted the NRC with?
Correct.
Wow. So it makes you wonder why they even took the UFO story seriously and looked into it, after getting all types of other strange reports. Of course, the guy did work at the plant, so did the other people. I guess that was the difference for sure.
Yeah, they took it very seriously. There was no indication, beyond saying it would be a wild ride, that they were making fun or tongue-in-cheek at all. So they did take it very seriously, which they should, coming from a security officer. But, of course, it would be very interesting to speak with that officer or some of these other witnesses. So hopefully someone will do that. Perhaps it will be myself at some point, but we'll see if anybody beats me to it or if any of us are able to talk to anyone at all.
Right. Well, I think we're getting kind of out of time-ish, sort of. I don't think we have time for another story unless you have a quick one.
Well, just very quickly, a couple of great cases. Roger Marsh seems to really love plucking out the triangle UFO sightings
right. I
from
agree.
the MUFON, and this was a triangle sighting. So there are a couple more recent ones. So one from Virginia, and this person drew a picture of what they saw, a triangular craft with 5 lights on it. This was from just March 19th, so very recent. Another one is from Pennsylvania. Dauphin is the name of the city. This was in February 14th, and this person drew, kind of did a graphic, like a Photoshop sort of graphic of what they saw. So a great graphic. So a couple more triangular cases that you can see also, all of which you can find at openminds.tv.
Great. All right, Alejandro, thanks so much, as always, for your professionalism and all that stuff.
My pleasure.
All right, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right, talk to you later, buddy.
All righty, so hang in, everyone. We're going to have a quick music break, and we'll be right back with John Burroughs. Hello, John, and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Martin. Appreciate you bringing me on again.
Yes, I think it was 2 years ago. I believe it was in December last time we had both you and Colonel Halt on, which was actually a very popular show for us.
Right. It was definitely an interesting show. You can say that for sure.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. And so I'm glad you're back on, and you do a show now with Linda Moulton Howe. And why don't you just tell the listening audience about that? Because she's a fascinating lady, and you interview different people yourself, right?
Correct. We started a show, it'll be just over a year and a half ago on KGRA called Phenomenon Radio. And we've covered different topics, but we tried to stick a little bit to the Bentwaters case itself. We've had different people on involving that and some of the phenomena that's in Condyne and some of this other stuff that can relate to Rendlesham, but also what's going on, period, in as far as the sightings and different things like that. We're on every Thursday night on KGRA from 8 to 10 Eastern. And we have a whole bunch of different guests on depending on the week and the topic. And, as far as where we're trying to go with different things right now, we've been talking about quite a bit about there might be some attempt of some kind of, I don't like use the word disclosure this summer, but I call it confirmation. There may be something coming out this summer on that'll be admitted. There's been some kind of like contact with something out there in space.
Wow. It's. I think I listened to an old show on YouTube or something like that from way back in the 1950s, and there was a guy in there that was claiming that some type of contact. He was sure that it was going to happen in his lifetime and within the next year or two, and it kind of made me a little like go, oh, okay, so they've been saying it all along, but maybe, just maybe, I truly feel like we are drawing nearer to something. Maybe it's my imagination, just like it was for that gentleman way back then. But are you hearing?
Well, I was going to say, I think expectations are too high. I mean, if you just look at how the government handles everything, and this may not even come from the government directly. Obviously, more than likely, the government will have to allow it to happen as far as they'll give their blessings, but it may come through the scientific community. So much of this has kind of been low profile because of the elections we had last fall. I mean, on top of what was being covered and, what could happen was more along the lines that Podesta and Hillary were going to do something after she got elected. But you had stuff coming out that there was some articles written. There was even a paper written, and I don't have the names of the scientists in front of me, but they wrote a paper that out, I forget what area out there, in the solar system, they think they've received transmissions possibly from that area. NASA just came out recently and said the same thing, that, there is a solar system that could support life. And Sadie jumped on it right afterwards and said they are reevaluating certain signals that come from that area based on this, this discovery, or whatever you want to call it, whether it was a discovery, how long they knew it, or, this admission. They're going to look further into maybe there's been some signals coming from that area. So my take on this is that if you have never seen the movie Contact, watch it.
Yeah.
Because that was kind of an interesting spin on how it could all take place, but it would make the most sense. And I'm sure for the hardcore people living in ufology forever, they're not going to buy, what'll come out of it. But if you let the scientists come out, say they've had some kind of interaction, or they believe they had, on top of the fact that it could involve, the Chinese have launched a quantum satellite. They've confirmed that. I'm not sure what we have up there. And they're also putting a quantum computer online that would play into this. So if you let the scientific world admit there was some kind of transmission that took place, because they all but did say that, they're pretty sure that it is, but they just had to reconfirm it. So if you did that, that would take the pressure off the government, and it would throw it into the scientist's lap of what it could mean and everything else. and then they could try to speculate on where it is, where it's coming from. Have they deciphered the message and all that? And it would take some of the heat off our government for, coming out and taking heated questions on disclosure. And on top of that, it also would fall into this Robert Bigelow scenario that he did 3 years ago with George Knapp, and it seems to be falling into place. He said we're probably going to get confirmation over disclosure, and that would be kind of what this would be, that there is something else out there, but we're not going to go any further with it other than that at this point.
Right. Yeah, I heard recently about those radio blasts. That's interesting. And I'm wondering how, I know that SETI is actually looking or turning their, telescopes in that direction. But I do feel like we've been gently led toward that direction, with starting with the Kepler telescope and all that, and just the more identifiable Earth-like planets that seem to be found, and some interesting ones lately. Just a couple things, John. I wanted to let you know that we do have some questions. Some questions came into our forum. We also have a chat room. Someone posted a question there. I asked him to post it again a little bit later on. So we'll be taking questions. As far as the phone goes, just to let the listener know, I started the show in 2011. I wanted to make sure it was interactive with everyone. So phone calls was important to me. Some people complain about them, but phone calls have been important. Skype is not allowing me to add phone calls to the conversation, and I thought it was something wrong with my software or something like that. But going into the forums and things like that, I find out that anyone that does shows is having the same issue. Skype is not fixing it because they've done a couple of updates since then. So I'm going to get a phone line service in here somehow. I'm going to get phones, but no phone calls this evening. But again, if you're in the chat room and you're live and you'd like to ask some questions, I will ask them a little later on as we go along here. It's better actually in the second hour if you're hanging in that long. So John, as far as, I think that when you were on before, we talked about the different, it's sort of convoluted tales between a lot of different people, and there's confusion you hear quite a bit with what happened, and I know that the situation was not good with you, the way that you were so-called debriefed, and I can't even believe that drugs were used. I mean, it just doesn't even make any sense that our government would do that. I mean, it baffles me because I don't know if there's other cases. Are you familiar with other cases, not UFOs, but other cases where they use drugs to interrogate or whatever?
Well, here's the thing. Okay, this is where there's a problem, as far as certain people that follow the case and different things that have happened. And even I want to throw this out about Colonel Halt. He has over and over said that he was not aware of any of that taking place right after the incident. But because Peniston under hypnosis came out and said that he was injected with sodium pentothal, but other people said it couldn't have been pentothal, it would have been amethol, because that's the more conducive drug if it really did happen. I think Bustinza mentioned a little bit that he was taken down underground and intimidated. He never really went into, as far as drugs being used on him. So there's never really been a total confirmation that took place for sure. Colonel Halt loves to harp on that, but that's one of the issues I have with him. He says he didn't know it took place during the time, and that's always been a question of mine, is if this incident took place, he claims he never was talked to, debriefed, or anything. He wasn't aware of this going on with us, but he was the deputy base commander, and if they brought these people in, and according to some, there was a group of us that were brought in and worked over, how could they not have known something was taking place?
It just seems like that would,
And the second part of it is his part about saying he was never talked to or debriefed doesn't make any sense either, because he had an interaction out in the field with something, to include a beam of light coming down to his feet with the tape. Now, he was questioned on that one time where, they go, could you have been? He goes, no. He goes, what? They go, why? He goes, well, several weeks later, I wrote down everything that happened, and I still remember it that way. And he says, well, according to what you said, other people said, it happened immediately after. So who's to say that you couldn't have been messed with, right away, and what you wrote down 3 or 4 weeks later is what you remember based on what they did to you?
Yes, I think you and I may have had a conversation about what I thought I heard Colonel Halt say to me in North Carolina about.
Right.
Yeah. So we Colonel Halt and I leave it at this point where I think that I heard him say that they used drugs on him, and he says he never said it, and then we're parting as friends in that way. We're not getting a big argument about it, but it is a little weird what you just said. Why he wasn't debriefed? I mean, he was right there, and he was commanding the whole situation. So it is rather bizarre that.
Well, yeah, it goes even deeper than that. As far as he just came out with a book, I think it was last fall.
Yeah.
Called The Hall Perspective, and it was typical Colonel Hall. I mean, as far as going after Larry Warren, and that I've always found that actually not right away, but over the years I've watched this, that it just seems like anytime something interesting starts coming out about the case, those two seem to go at each other. And most of the time it is driven by Colonel Halt, not by Warren himself. But it turns into this big, back and forth thing, and we get sidetracked from what actually could have been at the area in the base, what we could have encountered, what went on. But as far as the part about him telling the story, when you listen to him talk about what he remembers happening, it's fascinating. I mean, here the man was out there with a 5-man team originally, and they saw stuff in the sky, and they had a beam of light come down to their feet. He was recording this and stuff, and that makes that, that's huge. And as far as the fact that you have a lieutenant colonel out there that documented this, that makes a lot. That's important to the case, and to have people understand it, whatever you want to believe happened, whether it was ET, time travelers, us, or the phenomenon that they talk about in Condyne, or a mixture of all 3 or 4 or whatever, something did happen to us. But what ends up happening all the time is we get into this slugfest, especially him and Warren, and it sidetracks from the incident itself, and it never really gets around to let's move forward to get as many people to come out to remember what they heard, what they saw, or what they know, and go forward. So it hurts the case as far as the way he comes after Warren, but he also likes to come after the rest of us too and say we're not, reliable witnesses because of the fact that he feels that we were interrogated and everything else, but then he provides no proof to that matter. You know what I mean? And when I say that, I'm not saying that maybe something didn't happen to us, but why does he want to reinforce that and say he never was messed with, trust him and trust him only, when you can take some of his story as far as how he's tried to go after us, to include the fact that he lied about Adrian and I's participation in the incident early on, and just now in this latest book, he's admitted now that we were involved with this party and we went forward of him. And he even admitted he can't say for sure what happened to us once we went forward.
Right. So you yourself, what do you recall from the debriefing that you actually had?
That's the thing. I don't ever remember being debriefed. Now,
really?
I think Bastenza at one point told me we talked occasionally. He told me, he said he saw me up there. I think it was on Monday up there at the security desk, or not where the security operations was. The desk, the law enforcement desk, was across the street. So he saw me up there at one point. The only thing I ever remembered was simply we were on break after it happened Thursday night into Friday morning. We were on break Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I went out there obviously early Friday morning, and then I was back out there again Saturday night into Sunday. Now, I remember when we came to work Monday, we were on, before we went on break on Friday, the shift commander said we're probably going to have to write something up. Came back, they wanted us to write something up. So I remember going and seeing with Peniston, Kabansek, and I, we went in and saw Colonel Halt, then Colonel Conrad, and Colonel Williams, each one at a time, and with our statements that we wrote up. And Peniston did most of the talking, and basically we just got told that it was being looked into, and just to stay quiet, and they'd let us know if they needed anything from us. And I was in Airman First Class, and I just went on my way, and I couldn't explain it anyway. And there was a lot of people higher ranked than me that said leave it alone, so I did. So
now, I asked last time Colonel Halt was on this show. I asked him this question. I'm going to ask you the same. And
sure.
is that if this hadn't been brought to light, would you have talked about it publicly, or would you have just kept quiet about it?
Well, if it never came out and I didn't have any health issues, yeah, I probably never would have talked about it. But I can't say I wouldn't have, that later on down the line when I started having my health issues, that I would not have ever come forward with it or ever talked about it. I don't know. I mean, because of the fact that I think some of the reason why things happened the way they did was I was public about some of the stuff, as far as what was going on and what was taking place. So if my health was fine and the incident had just happened and it never seen the light of day, no, I would not have brought it up. There would have been no reason to.
Yeah. I can't imagine, though, what it would be like for you to be the lone duck trying to bring this up if if it didn't come out and you had health issues and you came out with it separately, or you broke the story. That would be, especially years later, it took that long for your health issues to start. That would have been a tough road to hoe, actually.
Well, yeah, that's true. But there has been declassified documents that admitted, talk about Rendlesham and Project Condign.
Yeah. That's
so,
right. Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I don't know if they could have kept it quiet, for so many different people knew about it, and stuff like that. The thing that would have probably made it harder to move forward with would have been if the Halt memo hadn't surfaced. That part, yeah. I think that one document was the document that forced a lot of hands, I think. And
it sure did, yeah.
Even if it would have come out, because you had the women working on it in the UK, you had Barry Greenwood and Larry Fawcett working on it in the States. Ray Boucher and Scott Colbert knew about it because it was actually before the memo came out, it was already being talked about. So it wasn't really ever kept quiet. So, but if you're just saying if the incident would have taken place, nothing would have ever come out on it, no one knew about it, and I didn't have health issues, yeah, I would have stayed quiet.
Yeah, wow. Now, you mentioned that you really don't remember a debriefing. Do you remember if you were ever told to never talk about it from any?
Well, that's what I said when we went in and saw the command level. It was Conrad and then Williams. It was just kind of along the lines is that we're looking into this. You need to just kind of stay quiet about it. Don't I didn't get directly told it was top secret, but Peniston implied it afterwards when we walked out and kind of the conversation what place. But yeah, it was clearly we were let know that we just needed to let it go, leave it alone. If they needed anything from us, they would get back to us.
Now there was on the second night that this happened in the chat room, says, what's your best guess as to what happened on the second night when they said he was brought up on board the craft, getting sucked up into the light in front of Adrian? Is that? I remember hearing bits and pieces of this, but
right, Adrian did actually. We did an interview with him on Phenomenon, and I'd known about this for quite a while. That had been one of the kind of the sore points for me over the years because Halt went on the attack. This was even before Adrian and I even knew it was out. In other words, I went on my way. I went to my next assignment, left there, went to another assignment, and then I started getting phone calls about it when the News of the World hit. And then these investigators started talking to me, and I was brought up. I go, why are you talking to me? Where they wouldn't give me the whole story. They wanted to know what try to get stuff out of me. Chuck DeCarl got a hold of me too, but it basically came to light that they knew I was out there on one night, and then there'd been talk that I was out there on a different night with Halt, but Halt was denying it, was bad-mouthing Adrian and I, and just saying that we were never even there. Then if you listen to the tape, you hear my name on it, Adrian's on it, and it's just slowly been broken down over the years to now where he's had to admit we were not only there with him, but that we went forward of him. As far as Adrian saying that, yeah, he said on the radio show, he said that he saw me go into it, and he saw me like I phased out and I was gone. So it's hard to say what it was. I mean, there has been a lot of good research done recently on technology in the area, what it is, declassified documents. I mean, it's possible it was something we were working on even.
Yeah. So many mysteries anyway to this whole thing to begin with. So your health issues, is it something you're free to talk about or would be interested
No,
in
I mean, what, do you have a question or?
Yeah. First of all, I understand your military records were completely lost or not found. So let's talk about that, and then the process that you had to get through in order to get some help on this.
Okay. Well, what ended up happening was it just happened after we went over in 2010 for the 30th. When I came back, I wasn't feeling well. But prior, going back to the very beginning, so I could set stage, right after the incident, I didn't feel well, and I had some vision problems. And when I also went in, my mouth turned white, but I didn't feel well. And when I went in, the doctor found a heart murmur. And to set the stage, you can get in the Air Force if you had a heart murmur. And there's been, skeptics or whatever you want to call them, say, well, they might have missed it. Well, from the immediate time that they first found it right after the incident, they said it was one of the loudest they've ever heard. Now, my entry-level physical, no heart issues, right after the incident, they found this heart murmur. Shortly after that, they sent me to Wright-Patterson, which it still may not mean anything, but not knowing at the time, but later on you find out this is where they look into some of this stuff, especially maybe if you had some involvement with technology or were affected by something. So I went to Wright-Pat. They confirmed I had a heart murmur, mitral valve, prolapse, regurgitation. So I had a decent type of heart issue that came on right after the incident. So that was established. That was in my medical records, okay? So when I got out in 88 of active, it's in my exit physical. Yes, he's now developed heart issues. And it says in there, I developed heart issues, okay? While on active duty. It wasn't before coming in. It was while on active duty. So I had these two documents. But what happened was after I came back in 10, I started not feeling well. I just thought it was bronchitis or something from being over in England, and I got sick. Well, when I went into urgent care, I was having trouble catching my breath finally. They found out I was in congestive heart failure, AFib. Wow. So they took me in, they got my heart back in rhythm, and the doctor at the time wanted to know, when I first developed all this and stuff. This was going back and forth. And I told him it happened in the military. So he said, well, I'd like to see those records. I'd like to look at the records and see what the initial diagnosis was, the echo and everything else. And I said, all right. So what I ended up doing was going to Senator Kyle's office, and I had them request my military. So I had a record of it, my military records and my health records. Well, the initial response back was my records weren't where they belonged, which the lady, most people that they think the senator directly does all this, it's not what goes on. It's the clerks, the clerk or the staff, I want to call them staff, that work for the senator that does the work. So I just got this letter back that the Air Force had responded back, said my records weren't where they were supposed to be. So my response back was, well, what does that mean? What are you going to do? And they said, well, we're going to dig further. So she made more inquiries, and they got back a portion of my medical, or my personnel records. But one of the things that stood out right away was there was no records of me being in England at Bentwaters. The records all started after I was back in the States. But I mean, looking at him at the beginning, you're like, whatever. I don't know why all my records aren't there, but they weren't. And then when she sent those records with me, in the letter she put, I believe your medical records are classified. And so she said that to give her a call.
You there, John?
Okay, you there?
Yeah.
I don't know what happened.
Yeah. Okay, you're back. That's good. That's all I
All
care
right.
about.
She said I needed to go down to the VA and file for disability because that would force them to answer more questions. So I did. So this was in the summer. Kyle was not going for re-election in the fall, and I didn't hear anything back after I went and submitted all the paperwork, took it to them. I did meet with her briefly when I gave the paperwork. She said a couple things to me that was interesting. She said that she knows something bad happened to us, but she feels that she's only going to be able to do her best to get me medical care, but don't expect to get my records and don't expect to get an answer on what took place.
Wow.
So that was a little interesting. So November came, hadn't heard nothing yet, sent him a letter. They responded back that he was retiring, that they were unable to get what they wanted, recommended I go to Senator McCain's office. So they forwarded my whole packet to McCain's office. They were able to get me in for my initial disability review. When I went in there, the doctor asked me point blank, after asking me some questions about my issues I was claiming, she just looked at me and she said, well, everything you're claiming couldn't have happened to you in the military because there's no records of you being in the military during that time frame, medically or personnel-wise. So I'm looking at it, I go, what do you mean? She goes, you didn't come in until 1982. These are the records I have in front of me saying that. Wow. Like, well, I came in 79. And so I showed her some pay records I had in a briefcase I was carrying. She looked at her eyes, got kind of big. She goes, I go, well, what are you going to do now? And she says, well, there's nothing I can really do other than write up what's available to me. That'll be up to, they'll pay a grade higher than me. It's like, fine. So 3 months later, they came back and denied my disability based on the fact that I was not in the Air Force from 79 to 82, provided a DD Form 214 showing that I wasn't, that I came in 82. So they altered my DD Form 214. Okay. And that there were no medical records for me from 79 to 82 either. So this was the denial letter, and it was all spelled out in there, right? So, and what they were emphasizing too was they acknowledged the fact that my claim was I was injured in the line of duty at Bentwaters in Rendlesham Forest, but that I couldn't have been because I wasn't in the Air Force then. So that was, McCain's office went nuts. I mean, they went nuts. I mean, they couldn't believe this was going on. And so they started pushing harder. I had to meet with some people up higher in his staff now. I was talking to now the people way close to him, and I actually got to meet him at one point too and talk to him about it. But what they were able to do eventually was they did finally get my DD Form 214 to show I was in the Air Force in 79. But the comment from the staffers was, we were able to get them to change your DD Form 214, but don't expect your medical records. You're not going to get them. Okay, they're classified. So I'm like, okay. But being as the fact is that they now had to admit I was in 79, and at that point, we were already threatening. I had a lawyer working with me out of Mississippi, Pat Frascogna, a really good guy. He wasn't a VA lawyer, but what we were going to do was we were going to go to federal court and file a lawsuit, asking for my medical records because the VA wasn't taking responsibility for me and my civilian doctors couldn't treat me because they didn't know what I was dealing with. So all that was going on. And so they started moving forward with that as far as they admitted I was in. And then we also got a VA lawyer involved in this, and then he was blown away by it too. But another factor came into play. We went to this, what I believe it was called the Citizens Hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, with Steve Bassett.
Yeah.
And so we went to the Citizen Hearing, and we did a presentation. It was Nick Pope, Pat Frascogna, the attorney, myself, and Peniston was there. And we did a presentation, and the presentation we did was on the incident, but what happened to us physically, and provided information to them. And they were moved by it, and they were even shocked that there was a classified records section where they kept military records classified medical. A lot of them didn't know it. A couple of them did, but several of them didn't. So they wrote a letter. They had 2 letters written. They had one for President Obama and one for the VA. And they signed it and they sent it into both of them. And right after that all happened, all of a sudden, Pat got a phone call from an ex-CIA guy, or I shouldn't say ex. He had been in the company, and then he was a consultant now for them. And he stepped forward and met with Pat, then met with me, then met with Peniston. And he supplied some information, including a letter with some data in it, that besides that and everything else that was going on, that was handed to the VA. And the next thing you know, all of a sudden, I'm getting medical care. I'm getting in front of a surgeon. They're doing surgery on me. And then with all the other stuff going on, eventually they granted me disability. And the disability was granted to me based on the fact that I was injured in the line of duty in Rendlesham Forest. And the press release that came out was de facto the U.S. government emits UFOs exist, because that was what the case has been labeled. You know what I mean? So
wow.
the evidence there that I presented, the government accepted and said that, yes, you were injured by whatever you encountered in Rendlesham Forest.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
That really is something that's groundbreaking as far as, something like that happening. Where the government
Right, but they never admitted. And Billy Cox, the reporter out of Florida, we provided him all the documentation showing him exactly, the case file that was presented as far as what we were presented, what the VA agreed to. And he wrote an article on it, and he saw the information. They admitted that my case was based on injuries in the line of duty at Rendlesham Forest. So they admitted I was hurt there, but what they haven't admitted to is what it really was, or what was taking place.
Yeah, well, you can only assume, right? So a question in the message board, Adrian, I never know how to pronounce his last name, Bastenza?
Yeah, Bastenza, yeah.
He once said, now this is allegedly once said because someone's writing this in the message board, that Halt was at the landing on the 3rd night. Had you ever heard that?
Well,
the landing
okay.
that you were at, obviously.
Well, yeah. Originally, the guys that went out there was Colonel Hall, Monroe Neville's disaster preparedness. Master Sergeant Ball was the oncoming security flight chief. So it actually happened, I believe, started on swing ship. By the time they got everybody together, the security flight chief on the incoming flight went out there. Lieutenant England was out there, and he would have been the shift commander on swing shift, and he held over. And then Bastenza was in that group. And then I met up with Halt after they'd been out there for a while and went forward. And yeah, this is the big discrepancy that there's a gap in the tape. Halt went out of his way to say that Adrian and I weren't there, and over the years admitted that finally now we were there, and then we went forward. And he says he can't say that something didn't happen to us when we went forward. But that is the area, I think, pretty much that he's always tried to cover up as far as keep it from ever going anywhere, and that they did see whatever happened to Adrian and I. Now, whether or not how close they were behind Adrian and I when we went forward or not, I don't know. But that would be the whole thing in there. And there's a gap in the tape where nothing happens for quite a while, and then all of a sudden he says they're heading back to base.
Wow. Now, do you remember actually walking toward the craft?
Well, I don't call it a craft. I always remember it as lights. In other words, Peniston described it as a triangular craft. Adrian called it lights until I went into it. Then he said it exploded into something that looked kind of triangular with blue lights in it. But him and I were running forward towards it. And what happened was whatever it was started coming back towards the Halt landing party when I met up with him. And Halt asked me, "Is that what you saw the first night?" And it was in a distance too, but it looked kind of like something when we were looking at it from a distance. But this time it was like coming over the top of some trees out in front of us, down in towards the field. So I was just like, I don't know. I'd like to get a closer look. So he let Bastenza and I go forward. And we started moving towards it. We were running. Adrian went down to the ground. He said he felt like something pushed him down, held him down. And then he described it. He saw me go into it. I phased out like I was gone or almost gone. And then when this was going on and exploded, then whatever it was, then I reappeared and was gone. And all I remember was getting close to it, and then it was gone.
That's all you remember. And
Yes.
what about that night afterwards? Do you remember how you felt, or did you feel like there was something else, wrong other than, the sighting itself?
Well, the crazy thing is that Adrian and I have talked about this, and I remember when it was gone, I was standing there, I saw him, we had a brief conversation kind of like about what took place, and we started walking back, and him and I have no memory from that point until the next day.
Wow.
We don't know where we got taken back, how we got back, who we met up with, or what happened. Now, I don't remember anything until the next evening, which was Sunday night, and I was out on the flight line in the post office. And I saw the C5 came in that I've talked about. I was checking mail, and there was a C5. And Adrian never really explained much other than he remembers the next afternoon. So I can't tell you, and neither can Adrian for sure what happened. There has been a new witness that's come forward recently that came on our radio show and talked about it. She worked in supply, and she said that on all 3 nights she was sent out and picked us up as she was out there as the incident was taking place, and transported us back and had it, and we were checked out by a doctor. She called him in a white coat. And the interesting thing was, a couple things about her story that was very interesting was Peniston, on more than one occasion, including with Halt, myself, and on other documentaries, he completely went to a totally different area than what I remember as being at in our statement support. And he would go right outside the East Gate and say it was right on the fence line. Well, she said the first night when she came out there, we were up by that fence line. And she also said that Halt was also taken back and looked over on the third night. And Halt went ballistic on that. But then he's gone around and talked a little bit about how he does believe we were all checked out and worked over by the guy she describes in the white coat. But again, he believes all of us were all worked over except that he wasn't, to include the fact that we were all taken away on the third night again, except for him. But how could he not know we were taken away and say that we were, but he wasn't then? Do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, yeah.
So he's kind of supported her story, and then taken shots at her story. But the most part of what she took shots at was that he wasn't taken in. He wasn't worked over. The rest of us were, but he wasn't.
Yeah. Do you think, would you give him like this, that, perhaps it's just has no memory of it happening?
Well, interesting enough, a guy that he worked with for a while, they were trying to put together a movie, and he was working with the guy, and he was the one that Halt when he came out and talked about. It was right around 10 that he'd always told people behind the scenes it was more technical and look at other areas. But then all of a sudden around 10, he came out and said it was ET and we're not alone. But his statement kind of supports Condyne in a lot of ways, other than he said he thinks it's ET. But the guy that he was working with came out and said later that Halt told him he has no memory in certain things and may have some missing time, but then Halt came back and denied it later. And there's been some other things that a couple of researchers are working on that I don't want to say much about now, other than we'll see what they come forward with, where he made some statements early on to some people that may come out that will support some things about the fact that he may have been worked over and he saw other things that he hasn't admitted to. So,
wow. Yeah. That is something. So I just want to throw a question at you that's in our on our forum, and that as a result of the UFO events that took place over the base, do you think that, this is for an opinion, do you think senior military staff have been briefed on how to deal with this scenario and contain any information leaking to the public if it occurred at another military base?
There's people that have done research on that. I think somebody found some documents that were out there that the Air Force had that how to deal with the UFO incident. It's hard to say. I mean, there's been enough incidents that have taken place over the years, that the Air Force has had strange things around the base and their personnel involved with, that I would assume that if it's not at the local level, that if it's once it's up channeled, then they go into, defense mode as far as how to handle it, and public affairs handles it. The other thing was in Condyne, it talked about how that wing commanders were briefed on a phenomenon because of the interaction with aircraft, and they were briefed and their pilots were briefed on how to deal with it because there had actually been aircraft brought down by this phenomenon.
Wow. Oh, amazing. Yeah, as far as you remember, when the events all started, had anyone ever talked about anything happening there previously before that?
Prior to the incident, no, I didn't know anything about that. Other than there were stories about the place being haunted, East End Charlie, and witches in the area and some weird stuff like that. But I'd never heard any stories of UFO activity. But after the incident took place, over the years, talking to different people, there were different people that had different encounters. Way back, even in like '78, there was some stuff that happened at Woodbridge that happened around the WSA that was active at the time with the F4s being there, but then it got deactivated after the F4s left and the A10s came in. So there was some stuff that took place there. There was some stuff that took place at Bentwaters. There was the 56 incident that happened at Bentwaters where they picked something up on radar and they chased it supposedly with aircraft. So, yeah, there have been stuff that had happened prior to us, and even a couple of guys that we've interviewed that right before our incident saw different things and stuff, strange things happened. But did I know about this prior to the incident? No. Have I found out about it since? Yes.
Yeah. Well, on the other side, I understand there's still things happening there. Do you follow any of that?
Yeah, I deal with people that are living over there. I talk to different people all the time, and yeah, there's still strange stuff. When we went back in 10, we had a guy come down, an engineer come down with equipment, and we filmed some weird stuff that was out in the field, and we had some EM readings and some strange stuff that went on. So yeah, there's still strange stuff going on that can't be totally explained.
Yeah,
to this day. So
right, and I heard you say earlier. I know that Chuck thinks that it's most likely E.T.
Well, he made a press release on it, so
yeah, he said that on this show as well when he was on. And you sound like you're kind of confused about what it could be, and I don't blame you. I mean, I would be too. But I guess I'm going to ask you, what do you think the most likely possibility of what happened on those nights was?
Well, I can tell you before I've done this research, I've always felt like it was something that we were doing that caused something to happen. And what I mean by happening is I can't tell you what we dealt with, but there was something else there other than just us. And so much research now shows the area, declassified documents show that there was all kinds of special weapons programs going on, special access programs that were taking place right outside the base, where it was RAF Bowsy, Marlsham Heath, the BT site that was connected to Marlsham Heath. You had Orford Nest. You had all this stuff that was there. They're working on EM fields and different technologies, plasmas and stuff. And then you had Condyne that got declassified where they said we were exposed. That was one of the documents that helped me get my my disability, was the fact that in Condyne it said that we were exposed to UAP radiation. So there was some Condyne admits there's a phenomenon, and that that phenomenon was present, in that area. So my take is I'm not saying I don't have an opinion either way on ET. Okay, I don't believe that we're the only ones in the universe, but I've never seen any hardcore proof. And what I mean by proof is there's never been an explanation of what it is that we'd be dealing with, other than Condyne came the closest and said there's a phenomenon that exists, and that as far as time travelers, well, could it be possible? I guess if in the future they came back, maybe, so there you go. I'm not sure, but I do believe we were doing something. I don't know if we were indirectly doing something that caused the problem, or we were zapping this energy field that's there. There's also the possibility too, we were working on satellite technology as far as bringing them down, and that we may have also zapped a Soviet satellite during that 3-day period and brought it down in the area.
Wow.
So,
yeah. One of the things you hear, now I've invited Jim Penniston on a number of times, and he's come close to coming on, but he's never totally accepted coming on. And without him being here, I don't want to talk. I'm not trying to talk negative, but I just want to find out what your thoughts were on the binary code, if you would like to share that.
Well, sure. I mean, I'd like to break it down in this way. Okay, first of all, there's an old saying, trust but verify. And the bottom line is when it first came out, I knew nothing about it until the 30th anniversary was coming up. And we were in Phoenix. We were doing a shoot with Ancient Aliens. They were going to do a 15 or 20-minute piece in their show. And then they were going to, because the show is done by Prometheus. They do the filming for Ancient Aliens. And they were going to then go over to the UK with us and film us over there for several days and put together a documentary and put it up for sale. So there was two things kind of going on at one time. And when we were in Phoenix, he brought his notebook. Now, I'll just be straightforward. The questions that have arisen about the notebook is it never came public for years. The notebook, the first discrepancy that was noted was in his notebook, he had the 27th of December as the incident taking place. When it took place on the 26th, and the 27th of December matches the Halt memo. And the Halt memo had the date wrong.
Yep.
Okay? So that was the very first discrepancy that came out, other than the fact that the notebook didn't surface until the mid-90s. Now, he came out with an excuse, well, I was still on active duty, so I didn't bring it out. But him and I and Halt did a show together in the UK called Strange But True. He never talked to Halt and I about the notebook over there. He never showed the notebook. He claims that he offered it to him at the time, but, I was in the production meetings. He never brought it up. So the notebook didn't come out for quite a while after the incident. And then there's another radio interview he did with a guy by the name of Richard Bertolino, who Bertolino said when they were riding back from Woodbridge that he was sketching what he saw, but with his notebook, but there was no mention of anything else being written in the notebook, or the glyphs or anything else. So a lot of this stuff didn't surface till later. Okay. So that's another question people have. All right. And that includes the notebook and the glyphs. All right. Mm-hmm. Then this stuff comes out. And so it comes out in the mid to late 90s. And it all came out around Georgina's book and Sci-Fi. But like I said, the date's wrong in it. So there's an issue with that. Then when we were back in October, that's when the binaries and all of a sudden shown to us when we're shooting. Well, the issue with that was people questioned, well, how come you never brought the binary prior to then? James Fox had a notebook. Hall handled a notebook. Hall even put in his book he handled a notebook and never saw the binary in there. He never talked to Fox about it, and Fox actually tried to figure out what the glyphs were. So you had all the issues with the notebook showing up late and then the binary not being a notebook. Well, his excuse for that was, well, I always kept the binary out. It was a loose-leaf notebook. Okay, I didn't want anybody to see it. All right, well, then magically he brings it to Phoenix so we can all see it, okay? And then once they see it, and obviously Ancient Aliens wanted to do something with it, and they did their thing, and Linda's people had looked at and did their thing, and they started interpreting stuff. But then his excuse was he really didn't want it to come out, and should never have come out, but they made him do it. But why would he ever bring it and show it to him? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So all this is circulating around. Then we announced it in England, and that didn't go too well. And then he did a radio interview, and that didn't go well. You can listen to the interview. It's out there, the questions and what was asked. Then there's people that have done more research, and they've uncovered that all the sites, the code sites, which, by the way, they had to put a point in there to come up with them anyway. But the code sites were all found on an ancient site that was available prior to him coming out with it. There was a letter that he wrote to Sally Rail in 96 saying that he had some kind of messaging, but it wouldn't come out till the 30-year mark, which magically is that's when it did. Do you know what I'm saying?
Wow.
So there's just a lot of issues, with the code and the discrepancies in it. On top of the glyphs have been found by a company in Germany that they're using on their equipment. So you have all these issues with the code. So when I first found out about it, I was intrigued by it. I tried to follow it through. They had a researcher work on it. He's I call it putting a square peg in a round hole, or vice versa, because he's basing it on, the dates, times that Pendleton said it happened, where the point would be for the things and different things, and transmission errors because Jim may have wrote it down wrong. So, in essence, they're coming out with a book. He's going to try to explain everything on how these discrepancies are and what they are, but he won't talk about them now for whatever reason. But it's supposed to be all laid out in this book, and what the codes mean finally, 7 years later after they were introduced in 10, what they could mean and all that. So what I say to people is this: I'm a skeptic on this simply because of all the discrepancies and the way it's been handled. But if based on, don't go in my opinion either way. I'm not recommending buying the book, but I wouldn't say don't. But if you do buy it, read it all and then come up with your own opinion. Don't let other people totally influence you, other than just beware that there is some discrepancies involving all this.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for all that. That is interesting. And I think there was a story out there too that some former girlfriend or something had seen the notebook without with just blank pages past the drawing.
Well, no, I don't think that must be misconstrued, because I know who you're talking about, and she didn't show up until the UK when we were over there.
Oh, okay.
And that had already been disclosed. And what her story was, and that was another issue that he never did. If you go back and listen to the radio interview, he never did get the pages straight, how many pages there were of binary, okay? And what her story was is she saw him write some binary. And the interesting thing was that would have been the last 3 pages that surfaced, I believe, 1 to 3. I can't remember. I can't even keep track. But in it said eyes of yours eyes. And the thing is that there was some things he broke up with her and came back and saw me in Phoenix. We were working on some stuff. And he did give me that piece of notebook paper and acted weird about it. So again, all I'm saying is there's a lot of things to this. This isn't cut and dry. He didn't come out right after he started talking and said, here's my notebook. I've had glyphs, I've had this and that. Now, I will say in his defense, he did talk early on about, early on, he described the craft differently. But then when he did kind of really come out and go public, he did call it a triangular craft. He did say there was something on the craft, but he never did even say that he walked around it at first and stuff. And that came in later. But he did there's some things of his story that he did say early on, but there's been a lot of stuff added over the years. And the fact is, if he would have just said everything right away when he first went public, it would have made it a lot easier to digest than, the way it's been piecemealed and there's discrepancies involved in it.
Right. And I do realize, this is going way back. I remember 1980, and that's a long time to remember things, but, things... and there is a problem with memory a lot of times, but this is above and beyond that, certainly. Someone wanted to know what you thought about Leslie Kane's book on this account.
You mean the one with the pilots and whatever?
Yes.
Well, the interesting thing, there's a backstory to this that I think kind of went by the wayside. They were setting this up for a while because I think people that know Leslie Kane know that she was working with Podesta.
Mm-hmm.
And this book was written, but you had Podesta trying to push for just with Bill back in the 90s. You had the Rockefeller stuff going on. Then she went forward with her book. You had the Podesta think tank that met. Leslie was involved with it. Halt Pope were involved with it. Condine was involved with it. So all this was going on. And one of the things that I never understood till later that I even wonder about was it was a pretty dry book. And what I mean, it was just straightforward. These are different incidents. These are what people seen. There was nothing, it was just basically a straight cut and dry book. And our book, Encounters, was kind of that way. And I never could understand Nick because there was some stuff that should have went in there about Condine that he held out. And then the codes, there was just the sites were released. There was a analysis done early on that was supposed to go in with Osborne, who now is working with Peniston on a separate book, and that was held out. And I can't help but wonder, based on the fact too that Hillary came out on Kimmel and said there's a new nomenclature called UAPs, which goes back to Condine and all this stuff that went on, that if they weren't going to use some of that and even Bentwaters in it. So there was a reason behind Halt, and he's an officer too, that this was done that way so that it could open up to her opening up some cases. But she did make that one little caveat that she said at the end was, what, we'll look at it, but if it's all classified stuff, we won't go forward with it.
Well, in your opinion, what do you think is the best documentary, most accurate documentary that, how it's reflecting what actually happened?
Well, I think it's kind of a two-thing phase thing you have to say. There was one that was done, and I can't remember what it's called, but it was done, I think it would have been early 2000s. It's been aired on History. It's out on the internet. It's on YouTube, but it had a lot of different people in it. As far as the different people were involved, it had Georgina Bruni in it and stuff. Then there was another one, Sci-Fi, that they looked at it hard. The initial one that Chuck DeCaro did was a very interesting documentary, and it's out on the internet, where he went in and talked to a lot of people. Adrian and I weren't involved in it, and Peniston wasn't involved in it. Halt, but they had a lot of other witnesses talking about it. People that were actually out there with Halt and stuff. So there's several different ones out there, but the one that had a lot of information that was well put together was that one that's been on History several times. That was a good one because most of us were in there, and so it was an interesting piece.
Now, in your everyday life as John Burroughs, are there connections to this, like in your everyday life, or is it something that I know you're on with Linda once a week. Is it something that you just, visit now and then, or is it a big part of your life at this point?
There was a point when it was a huge part of my life. That's when I was sick and I was doing a lot of research. Mm-hmm. I started before I really got sick, before the 30th, trying to figure some stuff out. And then when I got sick, I really got into it. But since I've gotten my settlement and everything, no, I still look at it. I got different people that are doing some good work into it. I've backed off on some of that. But I'd say, it's always going to be there. And I always get reminders of it with different things that people uncover. But it's not something that every morning I wake up and that's the first thing I think about.
Right. And your community, for instance, do people know, like in your community, like, oh, that's John Burroughs, Rendlesham Forest, or can you, kind of get away with, running a typical life without worrying about anything like that?
Well, Sedona, when I lived in Sedona before I moved back to Illinois, it was hard not to go around without people not knowing who I was, obviously, because then also Sedona was identified as one of the code sites. But back here, it's been a couple times that people, when I'm out, the one time that stood out, but was I was at a baseball game here, a local minor league team, and I was in line getting food before the game, and the people behind the counter recognized me. I guess they just seen one of the documentaries on the TV night before, and they recognized me. But no, I can pretty much walk around and, I don't have to worry about it. I mean, it depends on where you're at. If you're in a town or an area where there's a lot of people are into it and stuff, you'll be recognized more, than if you're just in an area like this. And Illinois, believe it or not, has had a lot of weird things happen in sightings, but they're not really a big movement here for UFOs and stuff. So
yeah, interesting. Well, a question in the forum: on the first night of the Rendlesham Forest incident, after you called in that there was something moving in the forest, did anyone check with radar installations to confirm that something had been detected near the base?
Well, yeah, that's one of the things that was interesting. Now, Hall has gone on to say that he had them check when he was out there, and they said negative, but he found out later from radar operators that there was something that night. We never could have left base that night if it wasn't for the fact that they checked with our local radar, which is RAPCON, and they identified something, and then Eastern Radar and Heathrow saw something on radar that disappeared into the forest area. Because the reason why they sent us out there, and they don't like this to be discussed very much, including the shift commander who came in and disputed some of Peniston's claims, and Colonel Conrad did too, over the years about some of the things that Jim's added to the story. But I challenged the lieutenant. I says, why did you send us out there? Then, sir, it was off base. The local authorities have been notified that there was something strange in the forest, and we should have just monitored it. And the reason why we went out there was because they thought an aircraft may have crashed in the forest. And that's why they sent us out there to look at it. And the final piece of information that allowed us to go out there was the radar. Actually, something was on radar and it disappeared.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Now, when you actually, the first night, when you're out there in the woods, were you walking, basically side by side with Peniston, or were you like far apart from each other?
Well, we got out of the vehicle and we moved out forward. As we approached whatever it was, Peniston was in front of me to my left. I was in the center. Kabansak was to my right. So we were in a staggered line formation. Mm-hmm. So I was, I don't know, 6-7 feet from him when we came up on whatever it was.
So now he describes actually the triangle craft going around it and all that, but you just remember lights.
What? When we came up on the berm, as far as there was something in front of us, we could see it, and there was like a small berm. As we came up on the top of it, all of a sudden there was the lights, and it got real bright, so we hit the ground. Uh-huh. And what I remember then was the lights dimmed, and whatever it was went up and took off. And Peniston, again, like I said, over the years, he's added to, the fact that he got up, walked around it, touched it, and did all that stuff. So, yeah, he's got a different recollection. But Kabansak did one interview for James Fox. It was out of the blue, and I know what I saw. It was in both clips. Mm-hmm. And he basically said we got close to it, and whatever it was, we blacked out once we got close to it.
Wow. Amazing.
So yeah, there were three of us there. Now, Jim has now said that only him and I were there, and Ed was to the back. But early on, Jim did say in an interview that the three of us were together. So all I'm getting at is, yes, we all have kind of different recollections of what took place. That is a fact. And even Ed remembers it a little differently than I do or Jim. So
now, were you part of the crew that went back there and actually looked for physical evidence the next day?
Yeah, in the morning after we turned in, we saw the shift commander, and on our way home, he told us to go back out to the site. And they had the day shift commander out there. They had the day shift security flight chief out there. Our operations officer showed up. Those are the three I remember. There were some other people out there too, but off the top of my head, I don't remember who they were. but there was some British police out there too, and that's where the area was where they found the indentations of the ground and some damage to the trees.
Yeah, right. Now, I saw on YouTube there's a clip that someone posted on there when you were being led through hypnotherapy, a regression.
Right.
Is that the only time that you had ever done that, or have you tried things like that?
You mean hypnosis?
Yeah.
I'm not sure which one you saw because there's a couple different ones out there, but the original hypnosis was done in '88, and that's the one that was done because of the fact that both times I said when I got close to it, I don't know what happened afterwards. And what I mean by that is the first time I just remember it, going up and leaving. Peniston remembers it differently. The second time I just remember getting close to it and it was gone, and Bastenza saw that I went into it. So they put me under to try to see if I could remember some of that. So.
Now, has anyone ever tried, not that it's needed in any type of way at all, but has anyone ever tried to get any one of you on a polygraph test?
No.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the cases where there's so many witnesses, it would be foolish, to ever try anything like that.
Well, I mean, you can't say it would be foolish, but the issue with the polygraph is, what are they going to ask us? Were we out there? Yeah, that's been substantiated. I guess you could go after Peniston and say, did you really see a triangular craft? Did you really walk around it? Did you really touch it?
Yeah.
Did you really have binary? So yeah, they could do that. They could say, did you see what Peniston saw? So that could be clear through a lie detector test. But to me, what would be the point of the lie detector test? As far as if you just want to know if the incident took place, it took place, and strange things happened. And I don't know how it would clarify the rest. I mean,
right.
To say that not to do it would be stupid. I mean, whatever. I mean,
Has there ever been an attempt by any one of you to get everyone together to just sit down and hash out the differences?
Well, there was Jimmy Church tried to work on that at one point. Suppose he had somebody with some money that wanted to do it, and Halt just flat out said he wouldn't show up if Warren did. So that alienated people. That's what I'm saying all along. One of the bigger issues is that there's a lot of different people that saw the different things. We've had some of the different witnesses on the second night. We're on the third night, heard things and saw things, and it would be fantastic if that would happen. But there was always that thing hanging over the Warren Halt clash, and then some of the new witnesses that have come forward recently, Halt attacks them right away. So if you don't follow Halt's line, if you don't go along with what he said happened, or if you say anything different, he goes after you. So I don't think it'll ever happen. And to be honest with you, I really question whether Halt ever really wants it to happen. He, as a leader, as a colonel, if he really cared about us, if he really wanted to know what happened, as far as put it all together and get all the stories together, he would try to get us together, but he never has.
Do you think part of it has to do with the very fact that he was a leader and he was, a deputy commander of the base at the time, that I don't want to say it's an ego thing, but it's more of a control type of thing over the information? Do you think that's what it is?
Well, if you mean by control, is he part of the cover-up? I'd say he possibly could be. As far as just him controlling everything, that still couldn't keep us from all getting together. I mean, He's gone out of his way to not want us to get together, is what I'm saying. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He doesn't really seem to care about what really happened. He doesn't really seem, because if he did, he sure as heck, based just on Church's offer, could have, spearheaded it, because some of the issue could be money, but there was supposedly money on the table that could get us all together. But right away he had stipulations, and so it killed it. So
and this is a case that is still in contemporary times. This is It's going to happen. Time will move on. This case I think is going to go down as one of the it's already called England's Roswell and all that. I think it's going to go down as one of the most extraordinary cases. Most everyone is alive as far as I know, and it's just too bad that can't that can happen. All that is happening is separate accounts, and which don't always seem to line up.
Well, right, they don't line up, which, I mean, that's the point. Get us all together and see why. I mean, but again, I don't think that'll happen. I think I think the closest we ever came to it would have been the 30th. Now, I mean, I guess there's an outside chance on the 40th that, whoever's still around, and I'm not saying anybody's near death, but I mean, Halt's way up there in age. Williams has been sick and is up there in age. Conrad, I haven't talked to him for 3 or 4 years, so I don't know his status. But the senior staff are getting up in age. But yeah, it would be kind of cool, even if we could go to the UK to do it, that on the 40th anniversary, we pick a spot somewhere in Central America, Central United States, and everybody would get together. It would be cool and sit down and talk about it. But I don't see it happen. I'm not saying some of us won't get together, but I just don't see the enough people getting together and sitting down and talking through it. I think that it's by design this way, and I think that they're covering up. I don't want to say aliens or time travelers, but they're covering up what our involvement was as far as technology-wise, what we were learning from it, what we were doing. It's in Condyne. I mean, in fact, I did FOIA. I don't know if you're aware of that, but remember how the British said that they'd released all their documents?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, I caught them to admit that they hadn't. They're still holding 18 files.
Really?
And it's not a huge story. It's been around. It ended up on the floor of the House of Lords because they admitted it to me, and then they were going to release it, and they didn't, and then it got taken to the floor, and they said they were, and then they supposedly released it to the archives last summer, and then they pulled it back because there was still classified stuff in there that shouldn't have been. So whatever's in there, they're highly redacting them, so it means that a lot of classified stuff. But of course, the debunkers are saying, well, there's nothing to this. These are old documents and stuff. Well, if that's the case, why are they taking so long to release it, and why are they redacting so much of it? And then on top of it, I was going further along with some stuff I had and got them to admit that they actually developed a weapon off whatever we encountered. And then they sectioned me, and I can't ask any more questions until everything's released. So there's that whole issue going on. But they're covering up. It's easy to say aliens were there, but I don't know what was there, and I don't know exactly what we were doing and what else was there and what was going on. But it's clearly something that's still important to this day that needs to remain classified, to include my medical records. Do you know what I mean? And we still can't totally understand what could be in my records that they wouldn't want released to a doctor, at least, in other words, only certain doctors in the VA can see my records. Certain parts of my records are restricted from my regular doctor even.
Have you ever heard of anyone else's medical records being classified like that?
Well, what I've learned was through this lady that was working for Kyle, and she ended up going to work for the new guy that got elected in Kyle's place. He's a Republican too. Was that there is a special operations out on the East Coast. They store the records, I think, in Jackson, Mississippi, if I got this right. That's where the attorney was from. But they do have a classified section for operations that take place. In other words, like you have SEALs involved in operations to get injured, CIA, different people. So there are things in the records that would be classified because they can't release them, And then there are different people, like she said she learned of the record section in the first place because they were working on Agent Orange and they kept running into different roadblocks, and they finally got them to admit that there were different people's records were classified because of the stuff that involved Agent Orange. And then that was one of the first tip-offs to my records being classified because she was getting the same results from requests from my records and the way they were reacting and treating it as they did on certain people involved and this other stuff that was classified in Vietnam and stuff. So yeah, there is a section, but I'm not sure about anybody else's records that were involved. But what's interesting is the CIA guy that got involved and helped get my treatment actually went, I don't know if you're aware of this site, it's called Above Top Secret.
Oh, yes.
And he actually went in there because right after my records got when they gave me my disability and we did the press release, there was this huge debate about it. And he jumped in and said, yeah, I was involved with it. Yes, his records are classified. And there's only 2 other sets of records I've seen classified. Now, I'm telling you this in the public is that I didn't say this, he said it, okay? So take that, not coming from me, that he said there's only 2 other sets of records he's seen classified like this, Adolf Hitler's and John F. Kennedy's.
Unreal.
And that he said it probably ties into people that review my records with special access programs and stuff like that. But the fact are that my records are classified, and there you go. So he even came out and said that on this forum. So,
wow, amazing. Now, what about the story about the cameras being confiscated? I know there was an issue with pictures not coming out, I believe, right?
Well, yeah, there was pictures that were turned in and came back fogged. That much came out. I had nothing to do with any of that. I guess Adrian Bustinza, I believe, and Larry Warren made statements that why this took place on the 3rd night, they were ordered to take some cameras. But I wasn't there for any of that. So, that's what was stated, and I think Haltz denied all that. But, that did come out that way, and that the pictures that did come back were all fogged.
Right. Now, this is a question I'm going to ask you. It's pretty obvious that you would say not go near the craft. But other than the radiation issues that you had, and just pretend that didn't happen, would you do anything different? Like if you could take it all back and start all over again?
Well, yeah, I've been asked that. Would I go out there knowing what I know now? Well, if I would have been on duty again and there was no one else to go, I would have gone. This was my job. As far as if someone else would have stepped up and said they wanted to go, I would have known what I know now. I would have let them go. As far as getting close to it, I mean, both times it wasn't like, yeah, I guess we were trying to figure it out. The first night was the aircraft. The 3rd night I was just so blown away that it came back a 2nd and a 3rd night that, yeah, I was trying to figure it out. Unless if I went out there, I was opening myself up to anything could happen. So I would have done it again, especially the first night for my job. In hindsight, I may have not gone back out there the 3rd night. So
I bet. Now, someone wanted to know, and by the way, you wouldn't even know what night it was that you actually were exposed for sure.
No, Peniston has said that he saw that I disappeared also. He's talked about that some before. So I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, obviously, if I went into it and disappeared on the 3rd night, there had to have been some pretty interesting interactions going on. So if it wasn't the first night, some of it happened. Definitely something had to have happened to me on the 3rd night. So.
Well, I think you were pretty brave to undergo hypnotherapy to see what happened inside of, if you did go inside the craft. I mean, I don't think I'd want to know.
Well, it really wasn't at the time in '88 whether I went inside it or not. It was just, what can I remember that I can't remember? Especially the 3rd night. The first night wasn't that big of a question. It was like, look, this is what I saw. It came down. It was there. The lights, the forest lit up. It was white light, bright. There was this oval orange object in there, blue lights and all that other stuff. Then it dimmed and it took off and left. I drew that in my statement. Even in '88, remember now, Peniston's story hadn't come out where he had walked around it and all that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So for me, it was pretty cut and dry. This is what I remember. The 3rd night was the troubling night because of some of what Adrian was talking about, hadn't talked about openly, and I knew about. And when I got close to it, then it was gone. So that was the night we were really looking at. And I was just trying to remember what happened when I got close to it. It wasn't like, did I go into it or anything like that?
I see. Wow.
Now, I'll tell you this. I'm not going under hypnosis again.
Yeah,
that much. That won't happen again.
I don't blame you. Travis Walton says the same thing. He'll never do it again. Someone in the chat room wanted me to ask you if you've ever experienced anything post Rendlesham Forest, UFO sightings or anything.
There was obviously in 10 when we went over there, some weird stuff happened.
Oh yes, you mentioned that earlier. I'm sorry.
And then when I lived in Sedona, there was 2 or 3 times we were out in this particular area in West Sedona, and there were strange lights flying around and some stuff going on. So yes, I've seen things since Rendlesham, but again, I have no idea what they were, and I'm not claiming they were aliens. So how's that sound?
Yeah, okay, very good. Now, in the forum, someone wanted to know, have there been lots of reported UFO activity occurring over other military bases? Now, I know when it comes to, can't remember the base exactly, but like warheads and stuff like that, yes, but are there any other that you're aware of, military bases?
Well, there were some guys that, especially in the 90s, when Unsolved Mysteries came out, that was the first. Well, CNN did their piece, but that was early on for cable news network, and that was, if I remember right, that was done in '86. So cable wasn't big then, CNN wasn't very big, so I don't know how many people saw it. And I was in Korea. They hid me in Korea for a year with Halt and Williams. Believe it or not, I was at Osan, Halt was at Kunsan, and Williams was PACAF commander. We were hid away, so no one could get at us when the story broke. So nothing was really said to me then. By the time I got back to the States, it had been a year later. But after the Unsolved Mysteries piece came out, I had different guys come up to me and say strange things had happened at different bases. So yeah, there's been strange activity at different bases.
Right.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Some that's never gone public. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I'm just trying to think of the military base that which one it is, where I've heard that a lot of things have happened, but I in the States.
They've had a lot of activity down at Eglin over the years in Florida. Obviously, Area 51 comes up. There's been also activity out in California, especially down in the desert around Edwards and Vandenberg.
Yeah.
Kirkland down in New Mexico's had different stuff happen over the years too.
Right. Yeah. That all goes back to Paul Bennewitz.
Yeah.
Seeing some things, and
Right.
someone wanted to know how has this incident, being part of, actually this person wrote, one of the most famous UFO incidents in history. How do you think, besides your health, this has changed you?
Again, there's only 2 things. Before my health, all I cared about was trying to figure out what it was. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but, up until about 2008, 2009, it wasn't like something that I really looked at that closely. But then I also have to admit, with the internet, as it's grown over the years, it's easier and easier to research and to contact people and stuff. So that played into me looking at this closer too. And then obviously after my health issues came up, I really started pushing for stuff. So, if I was a healthy person, it would just be my drive to. I'd like to know. I mean, I'm not like Halt and Peniston. I haven't figured this out. Okay, I don't claim to have figured this out. I don't know what it was, and I know we had some kind of strange encounter, and I know that they're not being truthful about it, and I know they're covering something up. And because I was out there and I was out there twice, I'd like to know what I encountered. So that's the biggest thing that's changed in me. I want to know what it was, and I probably will always want to know what it is.
Right. And who knows if we'll ever have the answer. In the chat room, someone wanted to know if you think that Halt is deliberately trying to spread disinformation and confusion and trying to discredit other people. You sort of addressed that, but I guess they're looking for more of like an opinion. And if you think that's directly,
it's clear. It's clear that he loves to go after Warren. Okay, I mean, you can't say anything more about it. And do you want me to say, does Warren deserve it? Well, there's a lot of discrepancies in Warren's story. So, it's a no-brainer that he didn't like it, and there's been a big issue between Halt and Robbins too. But the thing is that, again, there's things that he hasn't said that he wasn't truthful about, and that he's never really stepped up. And I've challenged him on this more than once. Step up and get us together. If Halt said, let's meet in 6 months in this location, I think a lot of people would show up.
yeah,
And a lot of people will talk. And he's never done that. And the fact that he wants to continually attack everybody in different ways, and he does it more subtly with myself and Peniston and Bustinza and some of the new witnesses that come forward and stuff. But the thing is that he's not acting like someone who really cares to know what went on or to get us together and figure it out. I can say that for sure.
Yeah, when I talked to him when he was on the show a few months ago, he basically said for the most part of his life that he puts this on the shelf and doesn't even think about it. And, and he wouldn't be unless, the book came along. He was approached by, I'm trying to remember, over
John Hanson.
Yes,
but
right.
That's not true. He'd been shopping to try to get a book out for years, and no one would take it. He was working with Sally Rail, and she kicked him and Peniston to the curb because she couldn't get the truth out of him. She didn't feel what they were telling her was truthful, and they wouldn't cooperate with her. And there's been other people he's tried to do the book with. And I'm just going to be blunt about this. He came on, I've heard him do a couple interviews, and he said, well, my idea wasn't to make any money. It was just get the truth out. Well, they did an 800-page book that half of it doesn't even talk about Bentwaters itself, number one. Number two, he's a colonel in the United States Air Force that said ET's possible. And the best he could do was get the guy that wrote his book for him, write it for him. The man should have, if he was honest and people wanted to work with him, should have been able to get a decent author to come forward and write a book just on his experience and what took place. And to be honest with you, there should have been a movie by now, too, involving the incident and the fact that he was in the middle of it.
Right.
And it hasn't happened either.
Yeah. Going back to when this thing was actually happening, I've heard people that have had, major encounters think that it's kind of like the end of the world, or they just can't understand what is happening. Do you remember any type of feeling like that? Like, what the heck is happening to a lot of people think it's like worldwide or something happening when it's happening to them. Do you remember any of those feelings?
You talking about when we had our encounter?
Yes.
No, to be honest with you, I was how I want to get this right because somebody will come after me and add my age up. Okay, I would have been 20 and 80, right? So I was 19 years. I was 20 years old. Okay, because I was turned 20 in July. Okay, and I was all about having fun. Okay, so there's nothing on my mind prior to this has taken place. I wasn't into this kind of stuff, and when it took place, I really didn't look at it as what it came out to be as far as aliens and all this stuff. I just looked at it as there was something there, and we don't know what it is, and I can't explain it. And so, no, I wasn't worried about the world was coming to an end or anything else. It was more like what I just saw, I can't explain, and I don't see how it could do it. And the interesting thing is that on that note, at the time, the technology that we had wasn't known. And believe it or not, with these declassified documents, we had some technology back in 1980 that most people don't know about, and if they don't do their research, they couldn't believe. But a lot of what we saw and took place could be explained by technology now that's been declassified. And some of this stuff, even on that 18,000 documents that were released by the CIA, there's stuff in there that they admit to the technology we have, and the Russians had at the time, and that the Russians and us were playing back and forth with each other's facilities, including nuclear weapons at the time.
Okay, so let me ask you this. This case, has it made you look at other cases? And also, I want to ask you some things about the military as well.
Okay.
But
you talk about other cases. Kirkland happened right before us. It's very interesting. It was a weapon storage area. They had some stuff seen and happened just almost like us. And there was a lot of technology down there. So I've looked at that one. I've had Cash Lantern brought up to me on one occasion because it happened immediately after our incident. There could be something involving whatever they were hauling and maybe had something to do with us. I don't know. But as far as looking at a lot of other incidents, no. I lived in Phoenix when the Phoenix lights took place. I know more about it than I can say. But what I'm getting at is that would be the only other one I've really looked at closely.
I see. Now, you were talking about this. So this happened back in 1980. I have a friend that had an amazing triangle sighting back in 1978 in Massachusetts. A lot of people saw, a lot of witnesses. So you think do you kind of assume or think it's possible that the big triangles, even the huge ones that people are seeing, like the Phoenix Lights and other ones that are noted, do you think it's possible that they're military?
Well, all I can say is this. A guy that did the initial investigation in Bentwaters was Chuck DeCaro. We've had him on our show more than once. He left CNN, went to work for the DoD, and he worked for a guy by the name of Andy Marshall. And a lot of people don't know who he is, but he was the top think tank in the United States for advanced weaponry and new technology. And they called him Yoda. But Chuck will over and over tell you he's not trying to tell people we're not alone, that there's not some other life form out there. But a lot of what people see is probably us or the Russians or both. And I would say when I first got into this, I laughed at that. But now that all this stuff that's being declassified from the 70s and 80s and stuff that I just can't believe we had then, imagine what we have now. And on top of it, I can't go into any detail other than just tell you this. When I was over after 9/11, I was put back on active duty and I was deployed to the Middle East on more than one occasion. And I was in classified locations. There was stuff that I seen and took place that just would blow people's minds if they knew what we had and what we were capable of doing.
Wow. Yeah, it really makes you wonder how something doesn't get out. I know it's classified and all that, but it just seems to me that if these triangles that are floating around now, and again, there have been sightings of triangles 100 years ago too. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's a blanket answer, but
no. And that's what I try to tell people. I'm not saying just with our incident, I think it was both. Okay. Do I think that some of this stuff going on now is all us? No, I think it's both. I also believe that you have to look at the areas and look closely at the areas and what took place and what was around there military-wise and everything else. And I definitely don't think we're alone. But again, there's so many people out there that tell them there's grays, there's reptilians and all that. I'm not against any of that because there's stuff that's happened to me and stuff that I know that if people listen to my story, probably listen to think I'm a half nuts too. So I'm not saying these people are wrong, but there's just not enough evidence out there for me to tell me exactly what it is, how much of it's us, how much of it's something else, and how much we know other than I do believe whatever's going on, we're definitely trying to weaponize it and trying to understand it. You know what I mean? And to use it to our advantage. And whichever country holds the technology will have the advantage over the world and would have a better advantage to whatever could be going to happen or, whatever's out there.
Yeah, that's kind of scary, the weaponizing part of the possibilities. And that's been,
right.
That's something a number of people have talked about, like if these things, for instance, if it was ET and it was here and it was back engineered, that would definitely be kept secret because of the weaponizing.
Well, right. And you realize, too, that that's part of this whole thing that was with the contact scenario. Have you seen the articles where they admitted first that ET was possibly here and gone, whatever ET is, whether it's the Anunnaki? There's all kinds of flavors, Anunnaki, grays, whatever. Okay, there's all kinds of things that supposedly visited us. There was a little bit in the article that maybe we're we're not really what we think we are. We're aliens that were put here. The article that just came out with Mars, that life was seeded there and ended up here. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we're not who we think we are, which would affect religion and all that other stuff. So, I mean, and you go back to the contact scenario, what did happen? They gave us a message. We built this thing, and then we were able to travel somehow, whether it was just through consciousness or physically. They never really totally clarified, other than maybe it was time travel or whatever. And then she met up with something from somewhere else who said, we've been visiting here for years, not just us, but other species. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So there's been all kinds of these articles that are coming out now that aren't just, I don't like to sound mean, but there's a lot of wacko sites out there, okay? But these are more mainstream articles and more scientific stuff involved, and scientists talking about it, and even the possibility that there was life on Mars and the seeds from there came to here. So there's something to this. My two things is there's not enough proof to give you a definitive answer on what it is. And number two, they've kept the secret so long, what would cause them to want to talk about it now? But it does appear like there is a movement towards doing that. So why would they do that? And that would be my first question. Why now?
Right.
Why would you do it now? What is the reasoning? Why have you kept it secret for so long? And of course they could use the thing, well, we weren't really aware of it till now, and there was messages coming in, but we didn't know about it because we didn't have the technology to decipher it. Now this quantum has made it. So that could be their excuse. But I would find it hard to believe that quantum's been around for a while, that they're not aware of something, sooner than they're going to release it. And the question would be, why now then? Why would they release it?
Yeah.
Is it because technology, we're getting so advanced, they're going to have to admit to it? I don't know.
That seems like a logical choice.
Definitely they're working on warp drive, if you can believe that or not. That's been articles out. And they're working on gravitics, which is like impulse power in Star Trek. So, are they going to say that the message was given to us how to do this or what? I don't know. We'll see. But I do believe that there will be what Bigelow's pushed, confirmation sometime, maybe as early as this summer. And interesting enough, the Contact movie will be 20 years old this summer.
Yeah, that is such a well thought out movie. I love that movie.
Well, and it would be a good way to expose it to the public without massive panic.
Yes, I don't think that. I don't think, it may happen in some with some people, and like you mentioned earlier, some religions or something like that may not be able to get a grip on it. Well, going back to Mars, the possibility of being seeded from Mars, it's hard for the human brain to fathom time when it comes to, millions of years or billions of years or anything like that. So I agree that could very well be possible. At one time, there's signs of, of course, water being on Mars, and probably a magnetosphere to hold everything in. And, it's very possible there was life there. But have you ever wondered why, like, the rovers haven't really uncovered anything more solid as it comes to that? Or, do you think that's possible? Do you think that it's possible that they have recovered some things like that and we just don't know?
Well, I'll be honest with you, and I base this just on pure speculation, so take it for what it's worth. If there's something out there, they're trying to figure it out. And I don't buy the fact that they know nothing like they claim. And so I do believe they know more than they've told us. And then you get into the question of why they're holding it back. And you could go down so many different avenues, and they could intermix why they're holding it back. But I do believe we're not alone. I mean, I lean towards that with Condyne saying we were exposed to UAP radiation. UAPs are involved in this. In the British documents that are still classified, they changed the terminology from UFOs to UAPs in 2000, which is about the time the Condyne report was being put together. So I do believe they're aware of something. I just don't know how much they know, but I also don't buy the fact that they haven't done some contingency plans, prepared for it, and that they're not looking at whatever it is to weaponize it. So the rest of it's open to why and why now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. If we were being visited, this is, something I occasionally ask a guest. a guest, if we were being visited, why do you think that we're not being, actually contacted directly, or why do you think it's so evasive?
Well, I mean, you could throw the theory out. Are they trying to, and we just don't know we are? Was that what happened to us? Was that something they're trying to contact us, but we couldn't communicate with it? You know what I mean? So that's a question. Or you could go into the conspiracy theories that they met with our government leaders, world leaders. Some of the world leaders are really them anyway. There's a zillion reasons why. I mean, and that's part of the problem with disclosure. If you come out and say they're here already, that's going to that's going to blow up. And I mean, even they're not going to be able to restrain mainstream media from asking 1,000 questions.
Yeah.
So the easiest way to do this is simply say, we've received a message from outer space. We're in a process of either we've actually deciphered some of them, and this is what they've said early on. They're not that close yet, and to slowly build us into it. Because any other way, if they try, they're not worried about the debunkers and the skeptics, because a lot of them are just them anyway. And they're not worried about the people that are into this, because unless they say exactly what they want to hear, there's going to be skepticism from them. So what they're worrying about controlling is the majority of the people that don't know a lot about this. They believe we're not alone, but they're waiting for the government to tell us what to do next.
Right. And there has to be, I mean, like you mentioned earlier, if they just plain came out with it, there would be so many questions, and there'd be a lot of explaining to do, as Jackie Gleason used to say.
Right. And if you look at the context scenario, we just went into who is it? What is it? We don't know yet. Oops, they gave us this message. We can't decipher it. We're still trying to figure it out. Oh, we figured it out with the primer, and this is what they want us to build. And do we do that? And do we contact them? So the bottom line, it wasn't all the questions, are they here or not? It was simply, how do we talk to them, and how do we figure out what they want?
Right.
And I think that's the easiest way to go.
Yeah. And, you may be right. I wouldn't even know if the word would be disclosure or it would just be.
That's what Bigelow called it, confirmation. He said flat out, we'll confirm that there's something out there, but we're not going any further with it.
Wow. Great. So, John, thanks so much. We're at the end of our time here. Can you throw out one more time how someone would catch your show every Thursday?
Yeah, it's on KGRA. It's on the web. Just you can Google KGRA. And we're on every Thursday night. Linda Moulton Howe and myself do a show from 8 to 10 Eastern called Phenomenon Radio. And we bring on people involving technologies, different things. We're going to have somebody on with statistics, UFO sightings this week. We're going to have Danny Sheehan on the week after with the Vatican connection to this.
Oh, wow.
And then possibly there's going to be a show sometime towards the end of April where I'm going to disclose some more about my hypnosis. So.
Oh, wow. Great. And your book, Encounter in Rendlesham Forest.
It was Encounters in Rendlesham Forest. It's available on Amazon. Nick Pope was the main author. Jim Pennison and I contributed to it. And it's about the story of our experience inside Rendlesham Forest and Nick's experience inside the MOD. And it goes into content somewhat in there also.
Excellent. All right, John. Hey, thanks so much. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks for having me on, Martin. And let's hope maybe this summer we'll have something more to talk about.
Sounds good. All right. You take care.
Thanks.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
All right. That's it. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for joining in the chat room. And I thought it was a great show this evening. And also we have for next week is Ryan Sprague out of New York City. He's got a book out. I don't have that title in front of me right now, but nice guy.